Welcome to Changelog, where we explore the latest updates, enhancements, and changes to New Relic itself. In each episode, we dig into the new features and functionalities as told by the people who envisioned, shaped, and even coded them. We discuss the inspiration and the data behind the development, as well as common use cases and applications. I'm Leon Adato, one of the New Relic DevRel advocates, and joining me this week are, let's see, dun dun dun, we have, sorry, I got overwhelmed. Okay, we have Brad Schmitt, Principal Solutions Architect. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Hello. And also Omid Azizi, Senior Principal Software Engineer. Did I say all those words in the right order?
That is right. Thanks. Stoked to be here.
Okay. So I know we're here to talk about something really specific and really Kubernetes, but before we do that, I just want to, hear a little bit about both of you. First of all, what do those titles mean? There are a lot of words in both of your titles, and then also just what's going on in your life, like what's exciting or interesting or things that you're working on the side. Omid, why don't you start us off?
Sure. The title is what it is. It's an engineer, software engineer, right? Principal level, I guess. But for me, I always like to think of it kind of like more broad than that. I don't like to limit myself, right? So I'm dabbling in whatever I can do to help out the team, the Kubernetes experience, the New Relic product. That's my day-to-day life. It's some days it's more engineering, some days it's more kind of team building, some days it's more product management. Whatever helps the team move forward.
Nice. Okay. And anything going on the side?
Just love going out, hiking with the family. So we always try to make trips out to the national parks and things like that. And so we got, the US just has beautiful, beautiful national parks, and internationally we like to travel a lot too. So just always looking forward to those sort of travels.
Cool. All right, Brad, try to top that. First of all, what is, Principal Solutions Architect?
Yeah, it's pretty generic, but I think if you were to draw a Venn diagram, my role or my team, the team that I'm a part of, sits between engineering, marketing, and our go-to-market kind of sales team. So I work with Omid every day, and we talk a lot about the New Relic products and cool features that he and his team are building. And then I also speak to customers every single week, and I hopefully help them get as much value out of the New Relic platform as possible. And that could be either, working with them to build fancy NERQL queries, or helping them with their configurations, or showing them something in the UI that maybe they weren't aware of before. And then also I work closely with our marketing teams to do videos like this one, and also some of the other blog related collateral and other markety things.
Cool. And in your copious spare time?
My copious spare time, which I don't have a lot of right now. I think last time I did a changelog, I had recently purchased a house, and now I'm in between work emails, communicating with contractors and whatnot, because we have a lot of work going on in a kitchen remodel and some other smaller projects. So it's a lot of communication, which I'm decent at, but always improving.
Got it. Okay, so basically you're just feeding the money pit. Understood. That's
yes.
It is the ultimate of project management. Okay, so moving on to the work stuff. This is not the first time we've talked about Kubernetes on this show, nor will it be the last. We keep talking about it, but not everybody actually knows what Kubernetes is. Some people have remained blissfully ignorant. Let's help fix that. Who wants to do a quick Kubernetes explainer for the uninformed?
Yeah, I'll start it. Kubernetes very simply is a container orchestration platform. So it has a lot of really nice features built into it for those that are wanting to deploy containerized workloads to a platform that has resiliency built into it. It has scalability built into it, as well as a lot of complex networking. If you've worked with Kubernetes, you know what I mean by that. So things like service discovery and load balancing, but it also does other things too. So it's self-healing in a sense. It has fault tolerance, and it also brings with it configuration and secret management. So it makes deploying and managing and keeping containerized applications, containerized workloads up and running much simpler once you kind of get a handle on Kubernetes itself. I don't know, Omid, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's awesome explanation. For me, kind of like I think of it as everything you said, obviously, but we have Linux is the operating system for your node. Like Kubernetes is kind of the operating system for your cluster, right? That's kind of
Okay.
and it's what you interface with. It's what's going to manage all your workloads, just like Linux manages all the processes on your host. Kubernetes is what's going to manage all your workloads. Everything Brad just said, right? The fault tolerance, the handles your deployments, makes sure all your services are up and running, and you can check them and make sure they're running properly. But yeah, obviously the devil's in the details when you're working with Kubernetes.
Got it. Okay, so that's an amazing start. And I think the next question that may be on folks' mind is, okay, fine, I can see why Kubernetes is important and why it's valuable for organizations, especially, again, if you've got a application that has to scale and it's using containers and all that stuff. But what is it that makes it difficult in terms of observability? I mean, why doesn't everyone just use the built-in observability tools that come with Kubernetes? He said naively. Like, what is difficult or challenging about Kubernetes from an observability standpoint?
Yeah, I think Kubernetes, itself is a very dynamic thing. It's a living and breathing organism. Is that the right term? I'm not sure, but things are constantly changing. It's there's ephemerality to it. So things are scaling up and scaling down, and nodes are appearing and disappearing, and so you really need to have a good pulse on what's happening, and especially when something is wrong, what happened, where did it happen, why did it happen, and then zero in on that specific issue as quickly as you can. And Kubernetes clusters can be quite large. We have customers today that are running hundreds of nodes in a single cluster. So pinpointing that specific problem with a given workload using, I don't want to say traditional tools, that's kind of a negative term, but just tools that are very specific for a type of telemetry, for example. So we often see Prometheus in Kubernetes, and that's great for metrics, but it's not super great for application observability unless you've built Prometheus Metrics into your app. It doesn't really cover logs. So there are other telemetry types that need to be accounted for when troubleshooting various situations in Kubernetes. And what we hope to bring to the table from a New Relic standpoint is one place that you can view all of those telemetry types in context of one another. And hopefully we can do that with a curated UI that makes it easy to bounce from your application metrics to your log data to your Prometheus metrics and so on and so forth. So to kind of go back to your original question, what makes it so challenging? There are a lot of things, a lot of components in a Kubernetes cluster that emit data, that emit metrics, signals that you need to keep an eye on. And we try to curate those for you so that as, say, a Kubernetes novice, probably don't know what you need to be looking at, right? And so we hope to be, in a sense, that best practice one-stop shop for, hey, if I'm looking at a Kubernetes pod, these are probably the metrics that I, as a Kubernetes administrator, would look at first to troubleshoot an issue.
Got it. Okay, and that really does sort of summarize what we're talking about here today, but also what New Relic brings to the table all the time, which if you were going to, when people come to the booth and they ask me, like, what is it about New Relic? In context. Like, what do we make? We make in context. We take all the stuff that we help you collect, whether it's traces or metrics or events or logs or whatever it is, and we put it in context with everything else so that you can understand what's really going on rather than trying to assemble multiple things. And that's what you're speaking to is again, the Kubernetes clusters and pods, they're emitting a lot of stuff all the time, and trying to put that right mix of information at the right time is really where things get challenging. So with that being said, what is it about Kubernetes Navigator specifically, which, by the way, we haven't said those words yet, Kubernetes Navigator, that's the thing we're talking about. What is it that does specifically to remove friction?
Yeah, I think it makes exploring your cluster a little bit easier. So we give you visibility into various Kubernetes objects like pods or daemon sets or deployments, and then provide you a list of metrics based on the Kubernetes object type or entity type, as we call it in New Relic. Based on what metric you select, what entity type you select, and then you have a grouping option as well. So maybe I want to look at the CPU utilization of all pods in a given namespace or grouped by namespace. Or maybe I want to look at that same set of metrics, but grouped by the various nodes that I have in my cluster instead. So you can kind of pivot from different groups. You can do some filtering. And then we help highlight where you may have high or low utilization for a given metric type using the UI.
Nice.
Yeah.
Omid, anything you want to add?
I was just going to jump in and say, like, I think we've all been there, right? When you're troubleshooting something, it's never the same issue, right? It's always something different and unique. And like, I mean, if it was obvious, you'd kind of catch it easily, right? So I think the premise behind the Navigator, as Brad said, is, right, we want to give the power to our users so that they can slice and dice all of that complex data to quickly figure out what's going wrong, right? So that you can go quickly look at, everything sorted by CPU utilization or maybe memory utilization, kind of look for those outliers, look for anomalies, find what it is that's causing you that pain, but you're in control.
Cool. Well, at this point now, I have to see it. Like, I really want to, see what we're talking about. So, are we ready to do a demo?
Ready if you are.
Okay, let's take a look here. Let's start like that. So what am I looking at?
Yeah, so this is the Kubernetes Navigator experience. A few things just to kind of orient everyone here. I've already navigated to a Kubernetes cluster in my New Relic account. It will default to this summary tab in the secondary nav here on the left. You may be familiar, if you're already a New Relic user or customer, with the Kubernetes cluster experience. You can think of the Navigator experience as kind of the next evolution of that. So we have enabled the new Navigator experience with this toggle. If there's something in the Cluster Explorer that you need, or maybe you're just comfortable with that experience, you can toggle back to it for now. We did not want to disrupt, users' workflows by just giving a new experience and completely removing the other one without some sort of a transition period. So I did want to call that out. But just to kind of describe what we're looking at here, notice that I have some drop-down options here in the top nav, so I can basically group by or select the different Kubernetes object types that I might be interested in. So whether it be a pod or a node or a daemon set, those are listed here. We will be expanding this list, so there are definitely some that are not available currently, but they will be here in the future. The second option here is a list of metrics that are related to that Kubernetes object. So I can look at things like CPU or memory, but also things like container restarts or Kubernetes warning events. CPU throttling is another common one that users will take a look at. So this allows you some quick best practice metrics to take a look at, and then I can group these by either namespace, deployment name, pod name, or node. And I kind of alluded to that use case in our intro, but maybe in this case, I'm looking at pods by CPU used, grouped by namespace, but maybe I wanted to sort that by node instead. So I can easily see here that I have 3 nodes in my cluster. I have a gradient here, which helps me understand utilization. So, anything that's lightly colored is going to be low utilization. Anything that's dark is going to be high utilization. And this is all dynamic. So if I hover over this, I can see here that I've got almost 0.2 cores used for this specific pod. If I go over here to the far right, these pods are using very little CPU. So why is this important? It helps me as either someone deploying workloads to the cluster, or even someone that might be managing the cluster itself, to identify where I might have possible hotspots, resource contention, so on and so forth. So that's the kind of the purpose of the gradient view, but we also give some other views. So let's say I have some alerts defined, and I would just quickly want to see whether something is alerted or not. I can actually change the metric from CPU to alert status, and now I can see the status of various alert conditions that I've defined in New Relic. And I can see here that I have a Falco Sidekick UI pod that is in a not ready state, and it's been alerted since 10:24 a.m. So I may want to go quickly take a look at that.
We haven't said what time it is while we're recording this, so maybe it's just been a couple of minutes. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
We're not gonna, wave an accusing finger at you for slacking off. Also, it's a demo, so you have to show stuff. Everything green is boring.
That's right. So what I've done is, I've hovered over that specific entity. In this case, it's a pod, and we show a preview. And based on what I've selected, the metrics shown here will be associated with that. But then we also have an option to kind of show more details about this entity. So I can see here, this pod's not very healthy. It's in a pending state. And this kind of gets into where we're bringing together different types of telemetry. So I'm looking at alerts, but in this right-hand panel, I can see that I have 3 Kubernetes events that are telling me that I have some issues mounting volumes for this given pod. So that means that more than likely this pod doesn't have the right data or right configuration files that it's expecting to see, and therefore it can't start up. So right off the bat here, I've kind of identified what my potential problem might be using the UI, the alerts that I've defined, as well as Kubernetes events, which are coming from our events integration in the cluster itself.
Very nice. Okay, now there's a table down below that has been tauntingly talking to me. Like, what's down there? What is all that?
Yeah, so let me kind of back up a bit here. We'll go back to groups by namespace. So I'm zoomed in a little bit. You can't see a lot of the table. We do hope to expose a little bit more of that, or at least make this a slider so you can view more of the table without scrolling around. But really, this is an inventory of the various entity types that I've selected. So this is an inventory of pods running or available in the cluster, grouped by different metrics. CPU and memory are listed here, but you'll see these change as you select different things in Navigator itself. So it's useful if I want to quickly sort, by most memory used or CPU used as well. So these columns are sortable, and they really just kind of help take the hexagon view here at the top and make it more of a table view. So they work in tandem together. Now I can filter here as well. So maybe I wanted to look at pods in the Falco namespace. So I can apply that filter, but then, there may be use cases where you've got things grouped by a namespace, but you want to look at the distribution of those pods across the various nodes in the cluster. So I can actually change the group by to node, and now I can see exactly where these Falco pods are positioned in the cluster. And maybe for some reason they weren't distributed the way I expected them to across my cluster nodes. Maybe one cluster node has a lot more CPU and memory being consumed than another, which might be affecting the performance of my application. So there's a lot of ways that you can use this UI to help diagnose potential resource issues.
What else? Is there anything else that we need to see here?
Let's switch to a different cluster real quick, and we'll take a look at the way that we are able to kind of jump across different telemetry types. So maybe I want to look at container restarts. So a very common thing in Kubernetes is for the cluster itself, or the orchestration aspect of the cluster, to restart a container when it finds that it's unhealthy. And that's okay, that's a normal activity. But if it's happening a lot, then that indicates that, hey, something is not right, and you should probably go and take a closer look. So here's an example of a pod that's trying to run, but it's restarting a lot. It's going into what's called a crash loop back off state. And so we can use Navigator to find those workloads that are restarting most frequently, simply using that the gradient colors that we've applied here in the UI. Now, the other interesting parts of this is that if, for example, there were logs related to this application, I could drill into those from right here in Navigator. And so I can see this is a demo. We're simply running a stress application inside in the pod for demo purposes. But if these were real application logs, it would be really useful to identify, what might be happening inside that pod or inside that container without having to go into our logs UI and type in, the pod name and figure out what the time is that the error occurred. It's all in context. It's one click away, and it makes it very quick and easy for the user to kind of pivot over to that, the log data versus looking at just the info about the pod itself.
Nice. And that goes back to that whole in context conversation that we had earlier. That's the point is to take the relevant information and allow you to get to it quickly within the context of the problem you're investigating or the situation. Maybe it's not a problem, but whatever it is, to be able to get to that relevant, important information in the same context without having to switch over, like you said.
Exactly. Yep. And then one other aspect is, we've talked about logs, we've talked about Kubernetes events. There are obviously metrics being displayed here related to the entity type that I've selected, but many customers are also running New Relic APM to understand the performance of the applications running in these pods. And so we can give you visibility into the application performance from this UI as well. So I've drilled straight into New Relic APM from the Navigator view. This opens a new tab in my browser, which drops me straight into New Relic APM for the application running in that Kubernetes pod or that container inside the pod. So I've gone from a very high level overview of the status of my cluster, whether it be just simply metrics, CPU memory, network, so on and so forth. I can look at the actual alert status of the things in the cluster, and then I can go a few different directions from there. I can drill into logs, I can drill into APM, and that really helps me get to the root cause of whatever that issue might be that I'm triaging.
Right. And, again, Kubernetes doesn't exist, only for the sake of Kubernetes. That would be weird. Instead, it's in service of an application. So this lets you get to the situation, whether it's a problem or just you're investigating, how the performance is working or whatever it is. It lets you get to where you want to go within that same context. That's amazing. Okay. That's all good stuff. I'm going to ask, anything else that we want to see today?
So before we wrap up, I do want to call out that we have what's called entity dashboards built and defined for the different kinds of Kubernetes objects that you might find in your cluster. So for example, I've used Navigator to filter to the daemon sets that I have running. I'm looking at the metric pods missing. So I'm expecting a certain number of pods to be available, but in this case, I'm missing 3 pods out of, whatever the desired pod count might be. And so I may want to take a closer look at this daemon set to figure out what's happening and maybe there's some Kubernetes events related to why this isn't running as expected. So one way you can get to the entity dashboards, there are a few different ways, but one way from Navigator is to open up the side panel and click on the details button. And this will take you directly to the entity dashboard for that Falco daemon set. And here you can see more and more information about the performance of this specific Kubernetes object. So in the upper right, I can see clearly something is not right. I have some red widgets here telling me that there are 3 pods unavailable, 3 pods missing. I can see in the pods table here, the pod metrics, that ready is false. That's not good. It should be ready equals true. So these are not ready to receive traffic from other services running in the cluster. I can see that network is spiking, so things are trying to run and then having issues and restarting. I can also see that that restart behavior here in the container metrics table. So this is very much lining up with the pods missing number that I started with in Navigator. There's something wrong here. The metrics indicate that something is wrong. And if I go all the way to the bottom, you'll see here that I have Kubernetes warning events. And here are the events associated with the containers in this pod. So I can see that Kubernetes is restarting the containers because of the unattached or unmounted volumes. I have readiness probes that are not healthy, they're failing. So all of this adds up to a very unhealthy workload. There are some clues in here that would tell me what I would need to go do to fix this. And it's all in one place. I don't have to go to 3 different solutions to find this data. I came here from Navigator. I could dive into logs if I need to, but I wanted to kind of cap things off by making our customers and the audience aware that these entity dashboards exist for all the different Kubernetes object types that we're able to detect with our integrations. And you can find those by going to the Entity Explorer, and you'll see a Kubernetes option in your left nav, and that will bring those to your attention very, very easily.
Nice. Okay, so I think that takes us to the lightning round. Any final thoughts? I'm going to start off by simply saying that no one should ever judge you or make you feel insecure about how you pronounce kubectl. Like, however you want to say it is totally all right. Kubectl, kubectl, however you want to say it, just embrace that and go with it. That's my final thought. But you both might have something a little bit more on topic. So, Omid, why don't you start us off and tell us what should we be thinking about as we finish up here?
Well, first of all, it's clearly kube control, which no, just trolling there a little bit. But as you see the kind of the demo, to me, like this is really just a first step in kind of pushing on the Kubernetes envelope here. One of the themes that we kind of all hit on here was the in context part, right? We want everything to be in context. So other features that you can expect to see is, for example, if you want to see the resource description, if you want to be able to see your pod description, right? That should just all be in context, and you'll be, seeing that roll out. You don't have to change context, switch out to your terminal to kind of try to get that information, which you might not even have access to, honestly. But even like longer term, what about metrics, right? Prometheus metrics. There's a ton of Prometheus metrics out there. They're application specific, right? If you have a Redis pod running or your own application, which you've instrumented with your own Prometheus metrics, right? You'd really like to have those be accessible in the context of the pod that you're in, right? So when you switch over to your pod, you're looking at the CPU usage for that pod, you're looking at the restarts. What about the metrics? That has to be there too, right? And so I'm excited, we're going to be focusing on features like that, bringing in Prometheus metrics in context. And then even beyond that, I think the other exciting thing coming is, with all this generative AI, New Relic has Grok, which is super cool. So what about Grok plus Kubernetes? So should all stay tuned for that.
Okay, and Brad, bring us home.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Grok as well. I think there's a lot of interesting use cases for Grok when it comes to Kubernetes. I haven't figured out which kubectl, kubectl, kube control camp that I'm in yet. So I hang out in all of the camps. Leave a comment, I guess, if comments are going to be enabled, if you have a preference as to which version you like. But as Omid said, this is, we're still fairly early with this UI and Navigator, and we have lots of plans to build upon it. So if there's something that's not there today, or when this video is released, let us know. Give us some feedback. We'll be happy to field those feature requests and listen to the use cases that you might have, and make sure we're building our solution and our products to help you in your day-to-day. So thanks for the time, and appreciate everyone tuning in.
No problem. And I appreciate both of you taking time out of your very busy days to talk with us in this episode of Changelog. Thanks again. And I also want to thank everyone watching. There is an overwhelming amount of content that you can binge on these days. And we want to thank you for spending some of your very precious bingeable time with us. If you've enjoyed this show, please remember to subscribe so that you can get notifications when new episodes drop. For New Relic Changelog, I'm Leon Adato.